Hello, my name is Spencer, and in my podcast called The Dictionary, I literally read from the dictionary, but add in my personal comments and stupid jokes to make it more interesting. Episodes are family-friendly, short, and air every single day on basically every podcast platform. Come join me on this journey filled with edutainment.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
My name is Daniel Kaka.
And I'm Gage Agnew.
We are here with somebody who we have podcasted with in the past and who has been doing a lot of his own awesome stuff, such as Gauge Your Interests and other podcasty things. Our friend Gage Agnew. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Nice to be back in the PP of the Pipe Dream podcast.
Yeah, I know you have been doing a lot of stuff, and I know Dan has still been working on some different things with you, and I think you actually suggested what we're talking about today as a topic. Before we get into that, though, if you can plug some of your stuff, we'll do like official plugs at the end, but what kind of things do you do on the internet?
Currently, my main focus is the Gage Agnew YouTube channel. I have 3 shows going on right now, some that I favor more than others, but Gauge Your Interest is my main show. Dan has helped me film the past few, and he's been spectacular. Shout out to Dan on his own podcast. I've also been doing a show called Mildly Familiar, where I've talked to people I kind of know on Twitter and people that I just cold call, and we just have a conversation. It's a really unique concept. I have a lot of fun doing video interviews with these guys, and Almost Adults is still kicking.
Yep, it's a once a year, twice a year show.
Maybe, if you're lucky, twice a year. We just talk about whatever. We just kind of have fun on that podcast. We don't have a strong thesis to it, but it's still very entertaining.
So we are talking about Metroid, and we're talking specifically about a Metroid game that was never made. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes.
Kinda. Because this game did get made in 2021, but it's been in production since Metroid Fusion came out way back in 2001, I want to say.
Yeah, I want to know what your history with Metroid as a game series is.
My history with the Metroid franchise is actually very, very light. I was first introduced to the series on the Nintendo 64, which is interesting because a Metroid game never came out for the Nintendo 64. I knew it from the original Super Smash Brothers game.
Yep.
And then I was introduced to Metroid Prime and Metroid Echoes. Then I picked up Metroid Prime 3, Corruptions. I played through some of that. And then I picked up Metroid Dread recently because I heard such good things about it.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic game. That's pretty much the long and short of it.
Yeah, I've been a big Nintendo fan for a while. I mean, Zelda is my main thing. I don't know if I ever talked about it on this podcast, but I recently completed my journey to 100% every single Legend of Zelda game, which was a 2-year endeavor, which was a ton of fun. Metroid is a series that I'm familiar with, like you, Gage, first from Super Smash Bros. Because Samus was one of my favorite characters to play in the original and in Melee. Was Metroid Prime 3 the one that was on the Wii?
Correct.
Okay, so I played a bit of that one. I don't think I ever beat it.
Yeah, I got stuck at one point, and I'm like, well, I'm a middle school kid, so I don't have to deal with this.
It was like one of those series that was kind of always on the periphery for me that I keep going like, one day I'm going to try to like really dive into the gameplay and into the lore. When Metroid Dread came out, that was like, ooh, this is a sign that I need to actually get into this series, and I still have not yet, because once I finished Zelda, I just got stuck on Stardew Valley, and that has been consuming my life for like the last 3 months.
Yeah, I can never do like a Stardew Valley or like Skyrim.
Animal Crossing?
I can do Animal Crossing because if I leave Animal Crossing for one day, I'm just like, I'm done! Never doing it again!
Yeah. the famous thing that everybody knows Metroid for is like, oh, this is the series where it turns out that the protagonist is a girl. Oh my gosh. Big shocker.
That was the thing that I had remembered for the longest time because I watched G4 constantly when I was a grade schooler. And I remember watching something of like top 10 moments in video game history. And one of them was,
oh my God,
when Samus was revealed to be a girl.
I think you're thinking of Screw Attack. It might have been hosted on like the G4 website. I rewatched some of those for a Resident Evil video that I did on Gauge Your Interest. Subtle plug. It was the most 2000s and Crash thing that I've ever seen. It's like, you get to hang out with the president's daughter and you get to look under her skirt. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Calm down a little bit, 2000s. Screw Attack.
I mean, they knew their audience. So.
Dan, do you have any experience with the Metroid series?
I really don't. I think part of it is that I wasn't really a Nintendo kid. I started off with a Sega Genesis. It was my brother who got into Nintendo, but the thing is that the Nintendo that we got was the Nintendo 64. I think that was our only Nintendo console.
The best Nintendo system. Well, Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64 are both up there.
But I think that's why we missed the Metroid craze. But I mean, I also don't have any excuse because all of us had Game Boys, so.
I do want to speak to that a little bit. There's never really been a Metroid craze in like the common cultural zeitgeist, dare I say.
My first experience with a game console was the Nintendo 64 as well. I feel like Metroid Dread's release was the biggest impact that any single Metroid game has had. It was never quite like Breath of the Wild level, but it was still like, this is a game that everybody's got to play. I feel like that's the only time since I've been paying attention to gaming that Metroid has really had a moment.
For sure. Metroid Dread, when it released in 2021, so far as of March 2022, it sold 2.9 million copies, making it the most sold Metroid entry in the franchise. But it's not as profitable as some of the other Nintendo products or just other video games in general. The best-selling game of 2021 with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Pokemon Shining Pearl, that has released 14 million copies. And it still was outsold by Madden and 2 Call of Duties.
Not surprised.
Basically, what I'm saying is the Metroid franchise has always been critically and culturally significant, but never as like popular as like a Mario or a Pokemon or Zelda.
Yeah. All right, Dan, well, you want to start leading us down some of your notes?
Yeah, let's start doing it. Full-on disclaimer, like when we did our Godzilla episode, I'm going to try and pronounce these names as best as possible, but yet again, we are dealing with Japanese names.
And Dan is famous for his excellent pronunciation of names.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember seeing a bunch of names in the notes you sent me, and I'm like, oh, Dan's pronouncing them.
The original Metroid game was released in Japan on August 6, 1986 for the Famicom, also known as the Family Computer Disk System, and was developed by Nintendo's Research and Development 1 team, also known as the R&D1. It wouldn't be available for the NES and the North American market not until a year later, so 1987. The creation of the game was headed by 4 people. It was Satoru Akata, Gunpei Yokoi, Haruji Kiyotake, and Yoshio Sakamoto. Gunpei Yokoi previously worked for Nintendo as an electrician in 1965 to maintain the assembly line machines used to manufacture the Hanafuda cards. It was in 1966 with the invention of the Ultra Hand, which was a extending toy reacher grabber that caught the attention of Nintendo's president Hiroshi Yamauchi, and the product was very profitable. Yokoi was promoted and became the head of Nintendo's R&D1. He led the development of the 10 billion barrel puzzle, the Ultra Machine, Nintendo's love testing machine, and the Game & Watch, which was Nintendo's series of handheld games.
I always forget how many like weird little toys and electronics Nintendo made before they were a video game company, and how, oh yeah, I remember that being referenced in WarioWare. Oh yeah, I remember that being referenced in Super Smash Bros. Trophies. There was a WarioWare game with a love tester, and now I realize that they just put that in there because it was a reference to something that Nintendo used to do.
Nintendo's been around for a long time. It's been around since like 1889.
Oh, I didn't realize it went back that far.
It went way far. It was like initially a card company, and they evolved into what they are today.
Yeah, I remember that. Around the turn of the 80s, Nintendo turned their focus to primarily video games, and Yokoi was in charge of supervising Shigeru Miyamoto's arcade games Donkey Kong and Mario Bros. With Nintendo releasing the Famicom in early 1986, Yokoi was in charge of creating a game for that system. He hired Yoshiro Sakamoto to direct, with Makoto Kanoi and Hiroji Kiyotaki to design the game. So the gameplay would borrow from Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda, where it would be a platform scroller, but the character can move anywhere around the map in any direction, while the game's story and the look was heavily inspired by the film Alien and the work of H.R. Giger.
H.R. Giger, returning champion of How Did This Not Get Made?
Yes.
I feel like this is a name that's starting to get up there along with Guillermo del Toro on how often they come up on this podcast.
Yes, exactly.
It makes sense that they looked at their two popular games. We got Mario, we got Zelda. Let's combine the two's gameplay, combine the side-scrolling of Mario with the free exploration of Zelda to kind of create something new, which that's the style of game that's known as a Metroidvania, which is reference to Metroid and Castlevania. And it's one of those styles of games that I feel like doesn't get made super often. Like, it's kind of a niche genre to game design than, say, a platformer or something like that. It's such an interesting idea of doing exploration, because Zelda exploration style thing is all exploring a map. But when you have a Metroidvania, you're going up and down and dealing with different levels that way, which kind of adds a really unique dimension to the way the gameplay works.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, David, it's basically defined by an action-adventure game that's pretty non-linear and has utility-gated exploration and progression. It's a combination of Castlevania and Metroid, though the first Castlevania was a lot more, this is the beginning of the level, this is the end of the level. It's more borrowing from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which was released on the original PlayStation in 1997. The first Metroidvania game was actually not Metroid nor Castlevania. Both of those were in 1986. An earlier example is Brainbreaker and Xantu from 1985. You could even say that Adventure, the 1979 game where you're just a pixel.
Yeah, the Atari game, right?
Yeah, and you roam around everywhere, could be considered a very early iteration of it.
Where our good friend Fahuguagad comes from.
Yeah, somebody get this frickin' duck away from me.
I mean, it's like I'm right there, at the pond. Come here, ducky.
I will comment on your statement that Metroidvanias are not as popular as they used to. In a way, yes and no. Because Metroidvanias, they do not sell well.
Mm-hmm.
Symphony of the Night is considered one of the must-play games of all times. It sold 0.7 million copies for the original PlayStation.
Wow.
But the Metroidvania genre is still alive and well in the indie scene.
Yes.
With Cave Story and Shadow Complex being early iterations of the indie genre execution in 2004 and 2009 with Cave Story and Shadow Complex. It just kind of went crazy in the 2010s with Guacamelee, Ori and the Blind Forest, and Hollow Knight.
Yeah, Hollow Knight is the big one that I see referenced a lot in that conversation.
Yeah. Going back to the inspiration of the game, we did mention that it was inspired by Alien, H.R. Giger. I also need to mention that one of the bosses in Metroid is named Ridley, named after Ridley Scott.
Oh, I didn't even put that together, of course.
Yeah. I did have to look that up. I thought it was coincidental at first, and I was like, when they mentioned like Alien and H.R. Giger, I was like, okay, I can kind of see it, but it seems like a stretch. But like naming their boss Ridley like confirms it. And then I found something that confirmed that as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels to the Alien movies in this series. Like the second one, you have to take down the Queen Metroid, such as in the second Alien movie, where you have to take down the Queen Alien. And in the fourth one, you're kind of a fusion between a Metroid and Samus, the bounty hunter, much like Alien Resurrection.
Isn't that the part where she's like, kill me?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parts in Alien where they say that.
So it was decided that the name of the game would be Metroid. The name of the evolving creatures on the planet, Zebus or Zebeth, depending on where you read it. And you are tasked with exterminating them along with the mother brain. Metroid is a portmanteau of the words metro, or in the terms of rapid transit, and android.
Makes sense.
As the protagonist, you play Samus Aran, an ex-Galactic Federation soldier turned bounty hunter sporting a power suit from the Chozo, which is an ancient alien race. One of the first power upgrades Samus receives is the ability to turn into a morph ball. Think of it kind of like the Sonic Super Ball if you want to go fast.
Sure.
Jimmy, put in a spin dash sound effect.
The concept came about because it was originally a programming shortcut, but the developers enjoyed the feature so much that they included it as part of the gameplay.
Oh, love a good classic game design that comes about for a pure utility reason as opposed to like, morph balls are cool.
As Bob Ross would say, a happy accident.
Yeah, exactly.
They may have liked it more because it's easier to animate a rolling ball than it is a crawling character.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. After defeating the Mother Brain, you must now race against the clock to escape before the world self-destructs. Depending on the time that it takes for you to get out, will determine the different endings that you will get to experience. In one of those instances, it's revealed that the character Samus is a woman. In an IGN interview, Sakamoto recalled, "We were partway through the development process when one of the staff members said, 'Hey, wouldn't that be kind of cool if it turned out that this person inside the suit was a woman?'" I don't know how much of that is actually true. My guess is that this is an homage to Ripley in Alien.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen people say like, oh, that was like always the intention from the get-go of Samus. Then people are like, then why is there all this publicity material that refers to Samus as he all the time? One ad I've seen in particular that's got Samus in full armor with 2 or 3 hot ladies around them. Well, it was supposed to be a like, oh, look at this cool person. All the ladies love him. But has now come around to a lot of people love to tout Samus as a queer icon.
This was a big deal at the time because video games were primarily marketed to younger boys.
Yeah.
Having a female protagonist was very much going against the grain in 1986.
You can trace the fact that gaming is such a male-dominated space. You could trace that back to Spielberg making a movie about an alien. The E.T. game came out, crashed the video game industry, and so then when Atari wanted to sell the consoles, they couldn't sell it as an electronic. They had to sell it as a toy, and selling it as a toy meaning you had to choose the boys aisle or the girls aisle because all toys were extremely gendered. Before the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, any sort of like marketing you would see about video games was marketed to boys and girls equally. It was really marketed as like a family thing. You see like print ads of old Ataris and it's like the whole family gathered around to play whatever that tank combat game was called. But because the Atari video game crash happened, in large part because the E.T. game was so bad, now gaming has forever been completely gendered because Nintendo had to choose the boys aisle when they wanted to sell in America.
I wouldn't say forever gendered. I see it changing nowadays.
Yes, absolutely. It's just interesting. The little domino to big domino meme.
Yeah. This game, it wasn't really successful on the Famicom, but it was very popular on the NES.
Which is interesting that just means that the game was much more popular in America than it was in Japan.
Yokoi, he continued to look over Nintendo projects like the game Kid Icarus, the ROB, or the Robotic Operating Buddy,
Rob!
and a portable cartridge-based game console known as the Game Boy, which was released in 1989. Mm-hmm. With the Famicom now obsolete and the sales of the Game Boy outselling the NES, Yokoi wanted to bring Metroid to the handheld console with Metroid 2 Return of Samus.
I didn't realize that the Game Boy outsold the Nintendo at one point. That's wild to think about, like, the handheld market being that big at the time.
That makes sense, though. I mean, if you're the only one that's really doing this, because we mentioned before, the only other handheld games that they had before this was the Game & Watch. And I looked at a few of those, and there's like 24 games for the Game & Watch. But the thing is that if you wanted a game, you're basically buying a whole new device for that game. It makes sense why it would be so popular.
Yeah, and I guess, like, now that I think about it, the future of game consoles now are things like the Switch or the Steam Deck. That's something that's built to be handheld. I guess it makes sense when I think about it.
It's also funny how history kind of repeats itself.
Yeah,
And,
that's true.
The Wii U was outsold by the 3DS.
Yep.
They're like, we'll just make our home console portable.
Yeah.
Yep.
This game introduces us to Samus's gunship, and the morph ball now sticks to walls and ceilings when in motion. In the original game, the developers changed the color of the suit to determine whether or not it was a normal suit or a heat-resistant suit. But the first Game Boy, as you remember, did not display color, so they could not actually change the color of the suit. So to work around this, the developers, they created a suit that was bigger and bulkier. Specifically, the round shoulders were created for there. And now that is a staple of the character that we still see to this day. The game was released in North America in November 1991, Japan in January 1992, and in Europe in May 1992. Although Sakamoto, who directed the first Metroid, did not work on Metroid 2, he was instead focused on another Metroid game, Super Metroid, which would be released on Nintendo's 16-bit game console, the Super Nintendo. The game was released in 1994. The game continues where Metroid 2 left off. The details and the look of the game were significantly improved. In this game, we were given the ability to wall jump and the speed boosting ability, Shine Sparking.
It seems like Super Metroid is the kind of staple of the series that a lot of people would point to, in the same way that, like, A Link to the Past was the staple Zelda game for a lot of people.
You're absolutely right. People credit the Metroidvania genre not off of the 86 Metroid, but Super Metroid. And Symphony of the Night, of course. Yeah.
Also in this game, we got the grappling beam, there was an X-ray scope, and the ability to charge up her cannon to make a more harmful attack. I didn't realize it was interested in this game, but like that, I remember from playing Super Smash Bros. I remember that being like the move that you do as Samus.
So funny to listen through this moveset. All I'm imagining is just like the Smash Bros. Character slowly coming together.
Yeah. Yokoi would go on to develop Nintendo's VR console, the Virtual Boy, which was released in 1995, but ended up being a failure. With that, Yokoi ended up leaving the company in 1996. He would go on to try and develop other handheld game consoles like the Wonder Swan and the Tamagotchi. Unfortunately, Yokoi passed away in October of 1997 due to a fatal car accident. After the release of the Nintendo 64, we got a 3D version of popular 2D games like Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, but unfortunately we did not get a Metroid game. From the game's TM interview with Sakamoto, quote, "I was actually thinking about the possibility of making a Metroid game for the N64, but I felt that I shouldn't be the one making the game. When I held the N64 controller in my hand, I could not imagine how it would be used to move Samus around. So for me, it was just too early to personally make a 3D Metroid at the time. Also, I know that this isn't a direct answer to your question, but Nintendo at the time approached another company and asked if they would make an N64 version of Metroid, and their response was no, they could not. They turned it down, saying that unfortunately they didn't have the confidence to create an N64 Metroid game that would compare favorably with Super Metroid. That's something that I take as a compliment to what we achieved with Super Metroid." I know we mentioned this before, but the closest that we got to Samus in the N64 was through Super Smash Bros.
Yeah.
Very tragic story. I had no idea that he died.
It is neat to know that like Yokoi was so influential in like even the way that we game now was because of him.
Yeah. I feel like the Tamagotchi, it has a lot of influence into stuff like Animal Crossing or just like the games that are connected to the real world time clock. Not familiar with anything that was really like that before Tamagotchi.
Also, very smart move on their part, not trying to figure out a 3D Metroid on the N64 controller.
Yeah.
Have you held one of those things recently? It's not ideal.
Yes, I've got one right here.
Hey, look at that.
There you go. So you know it's baloney.
Yeah, I know it's garbage, but at the same time, if you want to play an N64 game, that controller mapping just does not match up very well with any modern controllers. So,
Oh, no.
it is something that I hear repeated a lot in like the design ethos of specifically Nintendo is they're so focused on how a character moves as kind of like the starting point of designing a game, like especially with like Mario, how he moves and how he jumps, and his move set is quite often where each iteration of Mario starts at. And so it is really interesting to think about like that was the thing. Like if we can't figure out a good way to make Samus move in a 3D space with this current hardware, we're not going to try to go any further and try to force a poor movement system onto a game.
With the anticipation of Nintendo's next console, which was the GameCube, Nintendo funded 4 games to be developed by Retro Studios. There was NFL Retro Football. There was Raven Blade, which was going to be an action RPG. There's Thunder Rally, which is going to be a vehicular combat game. And Untitled Action Adventure game.
Oh, that one grabs my interest a little bit. Yeah.
In the year 2000, Nintendo's game director, Shigeru Miyamoto, he came down and checked on the company and the progress of these games. Now, he didn't care for many of the games, but he did see a lot of progress in the game engine that they were using for Untitled Action Adventure game and thought it would work best for the new Metroid game. All the other projects were canceled to put all of their energy into Metroid Prime. The game originally was going to be a third-person point of view, but when Miyamoto got more involved in the game design, they switched to a first-person point of view, and the reason was to help the player control the aim of Samus's arm cannon. In the Metroid timeline, this would take place between the original 1986 Metroid and Metroid 2. This game introduced the Scan Visor, a tool used to access items around you and used to tell the story of the game. There was also a thermal and X-ray visor used to help solve puzzles. Samus was also given different types of beams she could rotate through, and the game was released in November 2002.
Yeah, Retro Studios nowadays, they're like buddy-buddy with Nintendo. They made the Metroid Prime trilogy, the original, and they made Donkey Kong Country Returns and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Those were both very successful platformers in their own right. Originally, someone else was going to make the Metroid Prime 4 video game, but Nintendo are like, look, we're just not happy with how this game is going, so we're going to start from scratch, and Retro Studios is going to take over and do the rest. Oh, also, what I just found out is they helped out with Mario Kart 7, probably one of the more influential Mario Karts.
Oh.
Something that I should mention about Retro Studios, they're an American-based company. They're actually based out of Austin, Texas.
USA! USA! Yeah.
I also love that it was a game engine that was then turned into, it's like, oh, this is finally something we can do with Metroid. It just reminds me of how Super Smash Bros. Started, where the early development of Super Smash Bros. Was just like wireframe fighters. In order to get it sold, it's like, oh, let's actually make these Nintendo characters, and that's what's going to get people involved.
They were placeholders at first, and then they're like, Miyamoto's going to cancel this. And he's like, maybe proceed with this a little bit. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Sakamoto was working on a 2D Metroid game as a follow-up to Super Metroid for the Game Boy Advance, first named Metroid 4, and then later renamed to Metroid Fusion. In this, Samus is infected by an alien parasite known as the X, which nearly kills her but is saved by a vaccine created by a Metroid hatchling. The fusion of the Paradise drastically changed the look of Samus. The story focused more on Samus's backstory and lore compared to the previous games. Metroid Fusion was also released in November 2002. After this, the same team made Zero Mission, which was released February 2004, which was an enhanced remake of the original Metroid for the Game Boy Advance. The game included many of the abilities added in the sequels, expanded on Samus's backstory, and the bosses Craig and Ridley are bigger and more detailed. This also included a new level where, after failing to escape Zebes, Samus must navigate a space pirate ship without her suit. Metroid Zero Mission would be the last game developed by R&D 1.
Interesting. I didn't know this was like technically a remake of the original.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Also, I did want to say the boss is Craig and Ridley, not Craig. Craig is like the guy I know down the street.
Yep, I see.
I guess this is also where Zero Suit Samus comes from. Is that sequence?
I believe so, yes.
David, what's your best Zero Suit Samus Smash announcer?
Zero Suit Samus.
That's good. I like it.
Zero Suit Samus.
I like it.
Zero Suit Samus.
Shout out to Xander Mobus, the current Smash announcer.
Later in 2004, Retro Studios made a sequel to Prime, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, where Samus navigates through the Phazon-infested planet Aether and jumps through two different dimensions, light and dark. When the Nintendo DS was released in late 2000, a multiplayer Metroid game was released with it, Metroid Prime Hunters. A year later, a full version would be released along with Metroid Prime Pinball, also for the DS. I did not know that there was a pinball game for Metroid.
Of course there was.
I think pinball games are underrated in video games.
Oh, I love pinball.
The Windows Space Cadet 3D pinball?
Yeah.
I love it.
As a kid, I was addicted to Sonic Spinball.
That's a nice one.
That was a great pinball game.
I feel like I have a memory of playing a Pokemon pinball game.
There's original Pokemon pinball for the Game Boy Color, and then there's one with the third and second generation in there for Game Boy Advance.
Okay, I think I played the Game Boy Color one. Also, I love that you mentioned this like dark world that she was going to. What was that, Metroid Prime 2? Which, of course, is, I guess, the inspiration for everybody's favorite part of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, dark version of all your favorite characters.
Dark Samus.
Yeah. I kind of view this as like a nod to Legend of Zelda Shadow Link in Zelda 2 and Link to the Past where you go to the Dark World.
Yep.
All right, now we're going to get into this because during E3 2005, which took place during May 18th to the 20th, Nintendo announced multiple products and games to expect from them. There was the Game Boy Micro, the Wii, and the Virtual Console. The game Nintendogs was demonstrated with an unfortunate happenstance where Miyamoto's virtual dog started humping another virtual dog. Other games to expect for the DS are Advance Wars Dual Strike, Mario and Luigi 2, Mario Kart DS, Sonic Rush, Animal Crossing, New Super Mario Bros., and Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. Some of the reporters were confused because the day before they were shown an internal product sheet with all the list games, and on that list was a new Metroid game, Metroid Dread. The next day, they were surprised to see or not see that Metroid Dread was not announced. In an issue of Game Informer, they listed off all the games Nintendo was coming out with in 2006, and one of those was Metroid Dread. IGN reported on September 19th, 2005 that Metroid Dread was being developed. Official Nintendo Magazine announced on February 17th, 2006 that Dread would possibly be released in November 2006. Then on March 16th, they marked it as just being released in 2006 with no specific date in mind. They kept on listing that it was going to be released in 2006. This is a Nintendo magazine. They put it in their April issue, May, and June issue. But once the July issue came out, the announcement just vanished and disappeared.
Ooh, spooky. That's part of their marketing campaign, is that it disappears like a ghost.
Yeah. So Craig Harris, who was a editor for IGN, who actually saw the product sheet back in 2005, he commented what he knew about the game on the Nintendo Voice Chat podcast, saying, quote, they still had Metroid Dread, at least a script for it. I saw the synopsis of the game and I know it exists, and they pulled the plug at the last minute. And they can always bring it back. Did You Know Gaming, which is a YouTube channel, they got an interview with him again to get a more detailed version of the story, and he was quoted saying, "My knowledge is based entirely around taking an off-the-record peek of an internal product sheet at E3 nearly 20 years ago. I don't know where I said something like that, maybe podcast banter, probably taken out of context though. What I read about Metroid was a brief one-paragraph breakdown of a story synopsis. Really basic stuff like Samus is back in the next game of the Metroid series. Not to be exact, but you get what he means. I never took notes about it because it was something I saw the night before E3 began, and I just assumed that it was going to be at the show the next day. It was likely decided between printing off the sheet of paper and day one of E3 that they weren't ready to reveal it for a variety of reasons. It was a no-show. In 2015, game historian Liam Robertson interviewed a Nintendo game developer who asked to remain anonymous about what the progress was. They stated that Dread development began in 2005, but at the time it was just concepts and design documents, and that pre-production had not begun. In an interview with Eurogamer in June 2021, Sakamoto stated, quote, 15 years ago when I originally conceived the game, the story itself wasn't clearly set. It's fairly recent we realized the detailed story. It consisted of Samus facing a dreadful opponent, a dreadful experience. At that time, I hadn't developed in detail the storyline within the overall chronology and background of the series. Sakamoto would later admit that the DS hardware was not capable of supporting Metroid Dread. I don't know how much I believe about that.
It's a lot of hearsay, especially in the realm of Nintendo video games. They're usually really tight-lipped about this stuff.
Yeah.
Metroid Dread is sounding a lot like Avatar 2, where they're like, the technology isn't ready yet.
Yeah, no, it's just no one was interested.
Also, no one was interested. Yeah, that's a good parallel.
It's also interesting how they were saying, like, it would be a dreadful experience. I mean, it does sound like they were thinking about leaning more into a little bit closer to the horror aspect, especially if you go back to the Alien inspirations. Is the Metroid Dread that we released, does that have like kind of a horror-ish element to it?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know around what time the game Dead Space came out? Because I feel like that was a game that was like the sci-fi horror video game that was like introducing that genre into gaming that hadn't really been done yet in a big way in gaming. 2008?
Yeah.
It sounds like Metroid Dread could have beaten that game to the punch as far as the horror sci-fi video game genre goes.
I mean, but we also have Doom, and that's way earlier.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true.
Yeah.
The kind of horror that they're playing with in something like Metroid Dread or Dead Space is more like you are not a superhero. You are just trying to survive in this world, trying to kill you. And there's a lot more sneaking around and being careful with your resources and that type of thing. Whereas Doom feels like this is an action movie where you're mowing down demons.
Yeah. In Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, which was released in August 27th, 2007, players discovered within 24 hours a panel that read, quote, Experiment Status Report Update. Metroid Project Dread is nearing the final stages of completion. Although this got a lot of fans excited and hopeful, the panel next to it read, quote, Experiment results unsuccessful. All attempts at using Metroids as a weapon power source has failed. Now, this confused fans, leading them to believe that the game is now canceled. But Brian Walker, who was a senior producer of Metroid Prime 3, denied the panels were indicators of the progress of Dread, stating that it was, quote, a fictional element of something else in the game that, by a larger coincidence, could be read to be given a hint about the Metroid game, which was not the case. It's a complete and utter coincidence. I will give some credibility to this because the interview in which he gave this, which was for Did You Know Gaming, when he conducted this interview, he had long since left the company. I don't know if he was a part of Nintendo anymore, but he was a developer over at Retro. he had nothing to lose if he basically revealed this.
Yeah. It's a wild coincidence, though.
It definitely is. He also revealed that Nintendo and Miyamoto were strict about not putting Easter eggs in their game. Also, Retro Studios were completely unaware of what was going on with any other Metroid game, so they were really just focused in their own little corner on what they were doing. Another 2D Metro game was shown secretly during E3 2009. Hopes were high that this would be Dread, but according to an anonymous insider, quote, "It literally looked like a port of Fusion on DS." News of this game again dried up and wasn't heard about again. In 2010, Sakamoto, while promoting Other M, revealed that Dread was real and plans for it started back in 2008, but nothing else was confirmed. In July 2015, a Nintendo software technology insider revealed that a prototype of Dread was being created in 2008, but the title had changed to simply Dread before it was shown at E3 2009. The team in charge of developing were dropped after the failure of Project Hammer, and the game was canceled around 2010.
Since the first 4 Metroids are loosely based on the Alien films, I was curious going into this that Metroid Dread would be based off of Prometheus, the 5th Alien film. Thankfully not. I think we dodged a bullet with that one, boys.
Yeah. So now enter Mercury Steam. So this studio was founded in Spain in 2002 by Enrique Alvarez and Jose Ignacio Naves. Not very well known in the 2000s, they made American McGee Presents Scrapland and Clive Baker's Jericho, as we all remember. And there was a mobile Nokia game that they made simply titled Zombies.
Huh.
Yeah. They would make a name for themselves when they teamed up with another familiar name that we've done in the podcast, Hideo Kojima.
Mm-hmm.
They also teamed up with Kojima Productions and Konami to make Castlevania in 2010 with much success.
You think you can bring someone back from the dead, don't you? Someone you love.
After that, Mercury Steam was left in charge of making 2 more Castlevania games, Lord of Shadow, Mirror of Fate in 2013, and Lords of Shadow 2 in 2014, with Konami as their publisher. Now, if you recall with our PT episode, Konami in 2014 released the freemium game Dragon Collection. Also, Hideki Hayakawa became more involved in the direction of Konami, and now the company's focus turned from well-produced quality video games to cheap mobile games and eventually gambling machines. Mercury Steam was not renewed for another Castlevania after that change. Konami would take the title Castlevania and apply them to mobile games and pachinko machines, but Mercury Steam was not involved in any of that.
God, I hate Konami so much.
Right?
That whole PT episode, I wanted to strangle that entire company. It makes sense from a financial standpoint, but what about the art, everybody? What about the art?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In an act of desperation, Mercury Steam developed a prototype of Metroid to pitch to Nintendo. Their goal was to make a first-person Metroid game for the Wii U. Like Prime Hunters, the players could choose between 6 different characters to play as. They even proposed a Metroid game for the 3DS. Even though Nintendo rejected their pitch, Sakamoto was told about the team trying to make a Metroid game. Sakamoto was interested in what they were capable of doing, so he played Mirror of Fate and was extremely impressed. He flew to Spain to meet with the developers. They told him about their games and Nintendo's rejection, so Sakamoto, he proposed that they do a remake of Metroid 2, since he never got a chance to be involved with the first one. Sakamoto was able to sell the game to Nintendo after explaining that there was a demand for Metroidvania-type games, and in 2017, Metroid Samus Returns was released for the 3DS with critical acclaim and even won Best Handheld at the Game Awards in 2017.
I think that's a beautiful thing about just art in general, how one piece of art inspires another piece of art, and then that ripoff of the art inspires a new piece of art. So Castlevania was inspired by Metroid to do their Metrovania genre in Symphony of the Night, and now Metroid is being made by the Castlevania people now. So hopefully we'll get a new Castlevania game by the Metroid Dread people.
Maybe.
Probably not, because Konami
has a stranglehold over that title, and they will not let that go.
Yeah. There was rumors early last year about them potentially selling off the titles to Castlevania and Metal Gear Solid to just PlayStation Studios, and I was like, oh please. I don't think that went through, but one can dream.
After working with Mercury Steam, Sakamoto knew that this was the team that he needed to resurrect Metroid Dread. Against Nintendo's will, Sakamoto put an Easter egg into Samus Returns. So if you completed the game with 100% item completion, you would be shown a cutscene to a dreadful Chozo memory, where Ravenbeak has just killed 6 Chozo overseers.
Ooh, here it comes. Here comes the game.
During E3 2021, Metroid Dread was announced, and this time it wasn't a secret. Sakamoto stated that it was nearly 15 years in the making and revealed that the development of this game took 4 years to program. Sakamoto's original idea was that the EEM, or the Extraplanetary Multiform Multi-Identifier, which were inspired by the SAX, which was the main antagonist of Metroid Fusion. So that would be a powerful enemy that would be too powerful for Samus to defeat, not until the very end of the game, when she became much stronger.
Right. That's where the horror aspect came into play.
Yeah.
Sakamoto did emphasize that this was not a horror game, which is debatable, but it was, quote, fear-based gameplay.
I would still classify that as horror as well, but it does get into the subtleties of the genre of, like, you know, horror can mean crazy scary monsters, and horror can also mean really tense edge of your seat, death is right at the door type of a thing. It feels like this is more in line with some of the horror of the original Alien, whereas Alien does have a scary monster, it's much more about the horror of, like, is this gonna find me in these dark, cramped corridors?
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to think about it as far as like movie genres go, it's like the difference between horror and suspense.
Yeah.
I would agree with Sakamoto that this is not a horror game, but it's a game with horror aspects in it. This game is primarily an action-adventure game where you shoot things and you find a story, but there's horror elements in it that, dare I say, are quite dreadful.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just not used to Nintendo games being difficult, so the fact that a Nintendo game is actually hard is scary enough.
The fear of never completing the game is the real horror.
Now, if you are interested in playing Metroid, but don't want to go through like the whole library of other games, Sakamoto did make it a point that he wanted this game to be like an entry point to anyone who's never played Metroid before, so they could simply start off with Metroid Dread and still understand what's happening.
That's my philosophy when it comes to YouTube videos. Like, if you click on a YouTube video, you shouldn't have to watch the 12 other YouTube videos that preceded it. You should be like, oh yeah, this is an independent video that I can just put on anytime because I'm interested in the topic.
Exactly, yeah. Even though the game is a 2D side-scroller, Mercury Steam added an element that they use for their Castlevania games. When encountering a more significant opponent, like a boss, the camera would then shift to a more dramatic mode, getting closer to the characters and adding depth and dimensions. On October 8th, 2021, Nintendo released Metroid Dread, a 2D Metroid game for the Nintendo Switch. By May 2022, it became the best-selling Metroid game ever made, like we mentioned before, selling over 2.9 million copies. Since its release, it had 2 updates. The first came around February 2022 with 2 different difficulty modes. There was an easier rookie mode, and then there was the hard mode known as Dread mode. And now they have, with their April update, they have a, what are those called? The speedrun modes?
Boss Rush.
Well, there's the Boss Rush mode, but that's known as...
Oh, a speedrunner mode?
Yeah, is it speedrunner? Where you like try to complete a game as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's speedrunning it.
Yeah, okay, I was right. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize there's like a special mode for that, though. What's different about the mode? Does it have a timer going or something?
I think you don't have to deal with like collecting items as much, but just trying to like just get through the levels as quickly as possible. There's 2 streamers right now that are competing to complete this game the fastest, but I don't have any updates on that.
Oh, do you know around like what time they've completed the game?
I'm looking at it right now. It looks like the current record holder, according to speedrun.com, is Satorha, Satorha, which has a real time of 1 hour and 4 minutes.
I could never speedrun a game. I want my games to be a stress-free, fun experience.
I was never super into speedrunning, but then what I got really into is randomizers. I think randomizers are such a fun way to play games. Particularly Zelda randomizers is what I play all the time.
Nice.
And that, I guess, has a speedrun aspect to it because me and my friend do randomizing races on Link to the Past all the time.
I wanted to ask you at the beginning, but I think it's also appropriate to ask you at the end, why did you want to do an episode of this, even though the game was made?
Because there is an interesting through-line story about like the journey that it took to get there.
It seems like what they initially wanted to make and what they were announcing 15 years ago is the game that we did see in 2021. Obviously, 2021 version would have much better graphics than if it would have been made at the time, but it seems like a lot of the design ethos, the type of gameplay that they wanted to use, based off of the little bits and scraps that were out at the time, it seems like a lot of that was intact, which is also kind of interesting to think about. Usually when a production goes on this long, a lot changes throughout the development, but it's kind of cool to see that it was like they had a good idea at the start and they just, for whatever reason, couldn't see it through. And once they finally saw it through, we got to experience that good idea.
I agree. It's a good kind of contrast to Duke Nukem Forever, which was like in development for such a long time. And there was even like different versions of it. I think originally it came out on the Xbox 360, but originally there was like an original Xbox where they have typical Xbox graphics from like 2001 and such. And there is a full game, but they're like, nope, the new system's out. You got to upgrade the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Dan, is there anything else you want to say on Metroid Dread?
No, that is pretty much all the stuff that I had found out about Metroid Dread.
I really need to get my hands on finally playing Fusion. I just beat Cuphead for the first time. I think I can handle Metroid Dread.
I would recommend, if you have the Nintendo Switch Online thing, just to play Super Metroid first.
Okay.
That's probably the most accessible game.
I need to do that. This is one of the few stories we've talked about on this where a good idea did actually get to see the light of day, and I'm excited that we live in the universe where this finally did get made.
It was a triumph of stubbornness.
Gage, you have any other final thoughts before we bring this episode to a close?
I wanted to thank you guys for letting me on and talk about Metroid and let me learn a lot more about this franchise.
Yeah, of course.
Just to reiterate what we've said at the beginning, Metroidvanias have never been commercially popular, but I think critically and artistically, they do have their place in video game history.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Gage, for being on the podcast with us. If people want to find more of what you've got going on, where can they find that?
You can follow me at Gage Agnew, that's GAGEAGNEW, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, also YouTube. My channel is just Gage Agnew, and I do a lot of fun video essays. I do a lot of fun interviews. The recent video essay that I did was on retroactive continuity or retcons, but I think a more appropriate plug for this one is if you like horror video games, I did a retrospective on the first 8 Resident Evil games.
Yeah, that's a really good video.
And Dan worked on it too.
It's true.
No bias there. I'm really proud of that video. Check me out, subscribe, like, and give me a good old thumbs up.
Actually, I will say about the Resident Evil video, there is a zombie who is featured in there. His name is Michael Spellacy, who was on a Justice League episode.
Hey, I didn't know that connection. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to find more episodes of this podcast, you can go check out our website, pipedreampodcasts.com, which is also the home of Come On Fahugwa Pods, Mystery Shack, Look Back, Escape from Vault Disney, and Pod Made You Special. Very excited about our VeggieTales rewatch podcast. While you're there, you can find links to our social media pages. We are on Twitter at HDTNGM. We're on Instagram at How Did This Not Get Made? And you can send us your emails, notgetmade@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any corrections or suggestions for future episodes. I've been really enjoying getting into these video game stories. Dan and I, we know a lot more about movies and TV shows than we do about video games, so please suggest more stories like this or like a PT that we can dive into the history of unmade video games more. You can also donate to our Patreon. We are so thankful for everybody who donates to the Patreon. For $2 a month, you get access to our special monthly bonus Unclogged show. And for $5 a month, you get access to all of Dan's notes if you want to go through this yourself. And my notes for the ones that I do research on. That's going to go ahead and wrap us up. So thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
Gesundheit. No, that's like how you say bless you.
Oh.
Never mind. Cut this out. Cut this out.
Zero Suit Samus.